The atmosphere grew heavy as the men serving Andre Hainal began to whisper among themselves, advising their lord to listen to the words of Joseph Bayezid. They pointed out that Joseph was present as a representative of the north, whereas their own knights were subjects of the center, and any escalation could trigger a disastrous conflict between the two regions, which resulted in Andre becoming visibly annoyed. Watching the situation deteriorate, Joseph realized that because the ideal scenario was no longer possible, he had to focus on avoiding the absolute worst outcome. He believed that only a decisive public loss could provide a foundation for their next move and allow them to plan for the future, so he requested that the duel proceed. He argued that they could not allow the reputation of Alicia Hainal to be tarnished by a forfeit, leading Andre Hainal to ask if Joseph actually had someone to stand in for Sir Joubert of Chazard. Andre felt confident that Duncan was the only knight Alicia had left, and believed it was a known rule that guests did not bring extra warriors, causing him to smile with the certainty that a duel was impossible. Joseph surprised everyone by affirming that he did indeed have a representative, declaring in the name of the House of Bayezid and for the honor of Miss Alicia that he would present a warrior of the blood of Suara. He pointed directly at Vlad, who met the gesture with an uncomfortable but steady glare. This revelation caused Andre Hainal to scream in protest, claiming that Vlad was not a knight and was therefore unworthy of such a duel. Joseph countered that in a duel of honor, anyone capable of wielding a sword could join, which only made Andre more frantic as he shouted that sending a mere vessel to fight a knight was a disgrace. Joseph barked back, questioning if Andre's people had even considered the honor of the House of Bayezid when they allowed this scheme to unfold, and he accused Andre of trying to taint the Bayezid name with shallow tricks. This sharp rebuke silenced Andre, as Joseph stated firmly that he would vouch for Vlad with his own reputation. Accepting the inevitable, Andre Hainal gave his consent while privately dismissing Vlad as a lowly vessel who could achieve nothing. As Jaeger began to tighten the straps of Vlad's armor, Vlad asked if he was truly expected to duel a knight in such a place. He nervously asked Jaeger if he would survive the encounter, leading Jaeger to promise that he would interfere if the situation reached a fatal point. Vlad remained uneasy, questioning what would happen if the situation turned out badly, even without reaching the absolute worst case. But Jaeger met this with a silence that left Vlad wondering why his mentor was suddenly so quiet. The tension broke briefly as Joseph walked over and hugged Vlad with the warmth of a father. Vlad told him that such gestures weren't necessary, but Joseph whispered for him to hang in there for just 10 minutes. He explained that he had a plan from the start and had already given Vorden his orders, meaning Vlad only needed to buy them some time. Vlad asked if 10 minutes would be enough, and after Joseph mentioned that more time would be even better, Vlad affirmed that he would do his best to hold out. As Vlad walked toward the ring, Joseph told him to be careful. Upon reaching Alicia Hainal, Vlad bowed deeply, and she gave a small nod in response before he took his stance opposite Pablo of Arnstein. Vlad introduced himself as a warrior of Suara, but Pablo paused to glare at him with pure disdain. Pablo threw his shield to the ground and told Vlad that he was unworthy of even hearing a knight's name, claiming that the moment an unworthy brat appeared, the duel ceased to be one of honor. These insults sparked a fire in Vlad, who internally fumed at the constant focus on status. He reflected on how he hated the way people obsessed over shiny, beautiful things, remembering his harsh past in the slums and resenting the idea that coming from a place of no words made him lacking. He questioned what made Pablo so different from him, leading Pablo to remark that basic standards had clearly fallen. Vlad glared in silence as Pablo told him to ignore the rules of the duel and strike with everything he had, intending to nip the problem in the bud. Believing that he deserved this moment to shine, Vlad dashed toward Pablo, and the two began to clash. Pablo parried the initial strike and pushed the boy away, yet for the first time, Vlad felt a different weight in his blade because he was fighting for someone else. He dashed forward again as the voice in his head instructed him to aim for the left where Pablo was shielding himself, resulting in a flurry of parries. The voice noted a scary level of devotion in Vlad's movements, and the surrounding crowd began to murmur about the kid's surprising speed. Pablo stayed on the defense for a moment, thinking to himself that Vlad's intensity was unnatural, like that of a starving wolf. He admitted that Vlad had great spirit, but suddenly, Vlad felt a massive weight pressing down from Pablo's stance. Pablo struck downward and told him he wasn't quite there yet, leading Vlad to barely use his sword to dodge the heavy blow. Vlad's body began to shake as he felt as if he were being beaten with stones, and Pablo asked if he was done with his tricks. As Pablo struck again, Vlad tried to dodge while almost looking away, but the voice in his head urged him not to block head-on and to try to parry instead. When Pablo launched a third strike, Vlad attempted the parry as instructed, but the force of the thrust sent him flying across the room. He struck the wall with a scream and fell to the ground, and Pablo began to walk toward him with slow, deliberate steps. Vlad struggled to stand as Pablo arrived in front of him, mentioning that it was impressive for a kid to have resisted for so long. Pablo said it was a shame they had to meet this way and raised his sword, telling Vlad to come and find him later in life. The voice in Vlad's head told him he had worked hard, but as Pablo's sword descended with lethal force, Vlad suddenly struck back to defend himself. This move shocked Jaeger, Joseph, and Alicia Heinel, as Pablo wondered if he was actually facing a counterattack technique. Vlad began to perfectly imitate the very technique Jaeger had used earlier, signaling to everyone that the duel was about to get serious. A low murmur began to ripple through the room as witnesses questioned whether what they were seeing made any sense, wondering how a lonely vessel could have possibly blocked the sword of a seasoned knight. However, Pablo of Arnstein thought differently, refusing to believe it was a mere coincidence because he had personally faced that sword and found the boy's resilience difficult to accept. Vlad struggled to muster his words and asked Pablo why things were this way, leading the knight to be struck by the intensity of the question. Vlad repeated himself, questioning why it was only people like those in the room who held everything, leaving Pablo confused as he wondered if the boy had lost consciousness. Vlad continued, trying to arrange his thoughts as he spoke of his own desires, while Pablo began to wonder if the youth was becoming lost in his own memories. Truly, Vlad's mind drifted away to his past in the slums, remembering how he always believed the boy he was deserved a chance to shine. He had spent his life wanting abilities and hoping for a single opportunity, dreaming of being deserving even as he stood outside the blacksmith shop, glaring at the swords with a hunger for more. He had dreamed of reaching that shining place and growing into something greater, which led him to tell Pablo in that moment that he wanted to be there too. It was as if a flower were trying to bloom, and Pablo was momentarily stunned by these words as he looked at Vlad and saw a gorgeous spirit that no one else could see. As the battle continued, Andre Heinel stood paralyzed with shock, wondering what on earth was happening, while Jaeger watched Vlad's bloodied hands grip the sword and felt a similar wave of disbelief. Jaeger had only demonstrated the counterattack technique to Vlad to encourage him to stay loyal to the basics, never expecting the boy to actually imitate and use it so soon. As they continued to duel, Pablo noticed that the initial sharpness of Vlad's blade was gone, replaced instead by an unshakable will that he found truly amazing. Vlad pushed forward with a will that directed his every move, striking once more, and turning Pablo's defense into a realization that Vlad's sword was practically crying out as it bloomed. In that instant, Pablo made a decision to fulfill his own duty as a knight by helping the boy's world blossom, leading him to strike repeatedly to force out Vlad's true potential. Just then, Pablo noticed the small particles of aura sealing out of Vlad's blade as he began to blossom, causing him to scream instantly for his shield. One of the men nearby screamed for Pablo and handed him his shield so the match could continue, resulting in Pablo striking his sword against the shield and demanding to know the name of the worthy boy before him. Vlad glared calmly at the knight and identified himself as the boy born in an undeserving, worthless place who had walked out of the slums to find his own path. He noted that even though his shoes were muddy from where he came from, the path he walked was bright, proving that his hope was no longer a destination but something coming from within. Vlad screamed out that he was Vlad of Suara as he suddenly awoke to his own aura, the manifestation of his internal power, causing a light so bright that those around him could barely see. To protect himself from the impact, Pablo was forced to use his own aura in the blow, screaming for Vlad to come at him as the true battle began. Not long after the collision, the room fell silent as Vlad lay on the ground, bloodied and spent, while Pablo sat close by and smiled, allowing the boy's head to rest on his legs. Pablo quietly mentioned that Vlad had done a great job, though the boy had already passed out. Suddenly, Andre Heinel began to scream that the use of aura was forbidden during the duel, and demanded Vlad be disqualified. Pablo glared at Andre, annoyed at his short-sighted reasoning. While Andre could only think of his own pathetic interests, he ignored the beautiful flower of talent right in front of him, focusing only on the fruit of his own schemes, which led Joseph Bayezid and Jaeger to walk into the space. Joseph thanked Sir Pablo for doing his duty as a knight, to which Pablo responded that it had been an honorable moment. Joseph then called out to the priest to confirm if what they saw was aura, and after the priest affirmed it, Joseph then asked whether the sacred rules took precedence over the Swordmaster's code. The priest was stunned into silence, knowing that the Swordmaster's code was a more prestigious title. Joseph explained that this code was a matter of honor and duty associated with royal authority, leading him to turn to Andre Heinel and state that since the code and rules were interlinked, no one there could say whether honor or duty came first. He told Andre Heinel that the incident must be reported to the Holy See and the Crown, resulting in the outcome of the duel being postponed until a clear decision was made. Joseph reflected that all young, delicate things in the world deserve to blossom, and that such potential is beautiful. This was the legacy of the founding king, Frausen, who had declared that those who bear the sword of honor must fulfill their duty to protect the precious young ones who express themselves in their own world, making this the very first code of his reign, and its effect remained strong even till today. The next day, Vlad was resting in his room when the exhaustion of the duel finally caught up to him, leading him to call out to Goti for some water. However, it was Joseph Bayezid who appeared beside him, pouring water into a pot as Vlad tried to muster his voice to mention that every single bone in his body was hurting. Joseph extended the cup, saying, "Here," to Vlad, and upon hearing Joseph's voice, Vlad gasped and screamed his name in surprise. But Joseph simply expressed his gladness that the boy seemed to have recovered some of his strength. Vlad immediately began to apologize for his actions, yet Joseph dismissed the need for it, telling him to make himself comfortable instead. As Vlad took the cup, Joseph asked if he felt pain in any specific area, to which Vlad responded that he did not. Joseph then offered his sincere thanks, admitting that he had never even imagined Vlad would be able to accomplish so much. He explained that thanks to Vlad's efforts, the duel was officially postponed. When Vlad asked for clarification on what that meant, Joseph explained that the matter was delayed without a final result, because the situation had become complicated once the rules of the sacred duel and the Swordmaster's code became entangled. The mention of the Swordmaster's code triggered a memory in Vlad of a time the voice in his head had told him about it. Joseph continued, explaining that to become a knight, one must make a pledge as per the scripture, and he suggested that if things went well, a day would come when Vlad must make that pledge as well. This prospect left Vlad stunned, as he considered the idea of becoming a knight. Joseph then stood up to leave, stating that he hoped Vlad would take good care of himself, and although Vlad insisted he was okay, he inwardly admitted he still couldn't move well, leading Joseph to say that he couldn't let Vlad leave in that state because he was the type of person who cherished things that deserved to be cherished. The scene then shifted to a different space where Alicia Heinel was speaking with one of her knights, Duncan. She asked about the guests, and the man noted that they were leaving one by one. Alicia asked if Andre Heinel had left as well, resulting in the man explaining that since the matter was delayed, he had requested personal protection from the church through the priest. Alicia expressed her annoyance that she had to let those who tried to push her to her downfall leave in peace, mentioning that it felt like her heart was being crumbled. Duncan responded that there would be time for retribution later, but for now, it was time for her to toughen up. He explained the importance of establishing complete control over Dearmar, which Alicia affirmed she must do. She then shifted the conversation to the lemon harvest, but the man noted it was not going well as production continued to fall. Alicia asked if they should switch to planting more barley, but he suggested they wait and see for a while, as changing the industrial structure was not a decision to be made lightly. Alicia agreed that it was indeed a difficult decision, thinking to herself that after clearing mountain-like trails, there was always another mountain waiting in front of her. She exhaled in weariness, but then spotted something that led her to ask Sir Duncan if most knights knew how to ride a horse. Sir Duncan asked why she was curious, stating that one cannot call themselves a knight if they cannot ride, as it is a virtue as important as the sword itself. Alicia smiled and noted that the gods do not give a person everything after all. Looking through the window, Sir Duncan moved forward to understand the context of her question, realizing that he could not feel the deep anguish Sir Jaeger was currently enduring as they watched Vlad's terrible trial at horse riding. The horse literally pushed Vlad away, causing him to fall to the ground while clutching his back in pain. Standing behind him, Jaeger reminded Vlad that he had claimed it worked with an expensive horse before. Vlad suggested that perhaps the horse needed to be even more expensive, which caused Jaeger to slam his hand onto Vlad's head while screaming at him to think a little before he spoke. Vlad held his head and insisted he was able to get on the horse last time, though he admitted Goti was the one who steered it. Goti affirmed to Jaeger that Vlad had indeed gotten on it once. Jaeger thought to himself that this was a serious problem, wondering if the animal was really the issue. He watched Goti try to calm the horse and realized that even his own horse was backing away from Vlad, as if it were terrified of something inside the boy. Jaeger then decided that was enough for the day. When Vlad asked if they would practice again tomorrow, Jaeger responded that they would keep at it, leaving Vlad a bit discouraged. Vlad asked when he would finally learn to ride, to which Jaeger stated they were delaying it for now. Vlad noted that he had heard that word far too many times since arriving, leading Jaeger to ask if he had a problem with that. Vlad admitted he did, causing Jaeger to exhale and mention there was no quick fix for this horse issue. He walked off, telling Vlad they would think about it once they returned to Sterna, as he had work to do. Goti then asked Vlad why horses seemed to hate him more and more as time went on. Vlad uncomfortably wondered what would happen if even more expensive horses didn't work, resulting in Goti suggesting he try riding a cow since they were duller than horses. Vlad told Godi to stop yapping and think before he spoke, leading Godi to laugh and mock Vlad for having to keep riding in a carriage and getting an earful from Jaeger. As Godi walked off to take the horse to the stable, Vlad cursed, wondering what the hell the problem could be. The voice in Vlad's head then suggested that perhaps the problem was that Vlad was moving too fast. Vlad mouthed the same thought, confessing he didn't know what to do next. The voice told him he had to learn to control his momentum, explaining that this was one of the ways to control his mental world. It added that if he could use aura freely, he could control his momentum. Vlad didn't fully understand, noting that he couldn't even consciously draw his aura out yet, and that it remained faint. The voice explained that mastery in battle requires training, reminding him of Jaeger's words not to run before he could walk. Vlad agreed, noting that they were set to return to Sterna after the farewell ceremony tomorrow, and he wondered if he should visit the tree on the hill one last time. In another part of the hall, Jubert of Shazard walked while reflecting on his failed mission. He felt sure his lord would understand the situation, thinking to himself that he could not blame the sea for making waves, as Vlad's interference had been an unfortunate accident. He found it increasingly ridiculous that a lowly vessel like Vlad had caused such trouble. Suddenly, Jaeger appeared and stretched out his sword, placing it at Jubert's neck. Jubert remarked that it was an aggressive greeting, and told Jaeger he didn't have to go so far. Jaeger responded that he felt he had to go exactly this far, leading Jubert to ask how long he had been waiting and if he didn't have anything better to do. Jaeger mentioned he had the day off, to which Jubert suggested this felt like a waste of a free day. Jaeger countered that one must catch up on delayed work during their time off. Jubert stated he understood Jaeger was displeased, but insisted he had no choice in his actions. Jaeger noted the coincidence, stating that he currently didn't have much of a choice either. Jubert pushed the sword slightly, and reminded Jaeger that they had the same job and should understand each other. Jaeger agreed, stating that if the master tells one to bark, one must bark, causing the conversation to grow even more heated. In that instant, Jubert and Jaeger began to slowly awaken their aura as a short battle was about to unfold between the two knights. Jubert exhaled and mentioned that he believed that was enough of a warning, noting that while others called them swordsmen, they were actually dogs that only bit when their masters told them to. He suggested that if Jaeger was done barking, he should enjoy his day off, adding that even the slightest amount of bloodshed would be considered a declaration of war against the Shazard family. Before he could complete his words, a force from beside him slammed into his cheek as Jaeger punched him, which resulted in Jubert being thrust straight to the ground. Jaeger then remarked that his lord was a nice man, so a little bite was actually fine. This caused Jubert to become quite pissed, questioning if that strike was enough. Jaeger responded that it was nowhere near enough, leading him to follow up with yet another punch directly to Jubert's stomach. Jubert fell to the ground in pain, coughing from the impact, while Jaeger walked off and mentioned that since they were in the same industry, he was sure Jubert could understand the situation. This caused Jubert to smirk and laugh as he said that actually, this should be enough, to which Jaeger agreed. Jaeger expressed his hope that they would meet again, but he added an apology, stating that he was sorry he couldn't pay the total price for the way Jubert had mocked his lord. Gilbert slowly got up and suggested that they would see each other sooner than later, noting that since the empire was falling apart, it was not a time when people could avoid burning together even if they wished to. He walked off after saying "see you soon" to Jaeger, which led Jaeger to think to himself that the man was right, and that the time was indeed coming. He sensed that a time when the sword would be needed more than ever was approaching, resulting in a silent acknowledgement that war was near. Just then, at the treetop, Vlad arrived and thought to himself that the presence in the area felt like an old friend trying to talk to him. Vlad knelt down and pressed his sword to the ground, telling the voice that they should have a quick look and leave before they run into Alicia Heinel like last time. He began to use his aura, and instantly the snake appeared very close to his face, causing him to glare at the spirit and ask the voice if it was truly a friend. The snake began to encircle Vlad, leading him to wonder if this was a friendly greeting. The snake then rose up and began to act playful, which resulted in Vlad being confused and asking why it was behaving that way. The voice told him not to try and understand spirits since they are but another form of the world, noting that the soul of a mortal cannot understand all that encompasses the world. The snake then opened its mouth and began to release energy from the space, which appeared very magical to Vlad. He remarked that the energy felt very warm and realized it felt like a blessing. The voice explained that this was a spirit's blessing, and Vlad felt the warmth spread across his body. The scene then cut to a different space where Alicia Heinel was standing beside Duncan and her knights to say farewell to Joseph and his men. She mentioned that she was greatly embarrassed to see them off in such a manner, and wished she could have held a huge banquet for them. Joseph responded that her intentions were enough, and noted that now was the time to fix the cracks in the Heinel family. Alicia thanked him, leading Joseph and his knights to bow and state they would be getting on their way. Just then, Duncan asked if Vlad of Suara could please come forward, which surprised Vlad. Joseph told him to go on, and Vlad then moved toward Alicia. Jaeger mentioned to Joseph that it seemed they had prepared a ceremony after all, and Joseph agreed, noting he had told them to keep it simple. Duncan then asked Vlad to kneel in front of Alicia, who expressed her true gratitude and told him that without him, the person she was today wouldn't be here. She stated that he had protected their honor and shone light over a duel bloated with fraud, noting that no amount of gratitude could make up for it. She pulled out a handkerchief and mentioned that, although he was not a knight, she would like to entrust her name to him as a man who was more honorable than a knight. Watching this, Joseph thought to himself that Alicia was a smart woman for wanting to prove her relationship with the Bazids by honoring a common prospect like Vlad. He noted that she was showing gratitude while simultaneously securing a connection. Vlad raised his head and wondered if he should simply accept the gift, realizing the handkerchief was clearly very valuable. But Vlad was busy remembering Jaeger's previous lessons. He recalled how refusing Rudiger's peanuts had resulted in a harsh reprimand, and thinking he should avoid another beating, he reached out, grabbing the cloth, and thanked Alicia. This action caused the entire crowd to gasp in shock as they watched him, but Joseph began to laugh as he realized Vlad had no knowledge of noble customs due to growing up in the back alley. Sir Duncan observed the clumsy exchange, and remarked that the current method was not the proper way to handle such a delicate tradition. These words caught Vlad by surprise, leading the older knight to explain that there were only 2 established ways a lady could pass over a handkerchief symbolizing her honor. He noted that it was typically done either by hanging it on the end of a sword or by passing it directly from hand to hand, with one gesture representing honor and the other signifying love, resulting in a moment of significant confusion, which in turn left the surrounding witnesses feeling quite perplexed by the sudden awkwardness. Vlad felt a mounting sense of discomfort, though he managed to tell her that he would make sure to use the gift well. As they were returning in the carriage, Joseph Bayezid admitted that he had not been that flustered in a very long time. He confessed that he felt partly at fault for the oversight, suggesting that the wandering minstrels would likely have enough material to sing about this event for quite a while. These observations led Vlad to offer a sincere apology for the scene he had caused. From outside the carriage, Jaeger shouted a firm instruction, telling Vlad that from now on he should look to him for guidance whenever he had to receive anything from a noble. Vlad responded in a soft tone, promising to keep that advice in mind for the future. Joseph eventually offered his congratulations despite the earlier tension, noting that Vlad was now a man officially honored by a high-ranking noble like Miss Alicia Heinel, that as a result of this favor, Vlad had truly risen to the rank of an honorable knight, a status that now carried the weight of noble recognition. Vlad was surprised as he listened to the talk of honorable knights, leading Joseph to clarify that in any place where Alicia Heinel's name was recognized, Vlad would now be treated with the respect due to a knight. Joseph added that this influence was currently limited to Dierma, since she had only just become a baron, causing Vlad to realize that his new title was an honorary one, and that becoming a true knight would not be such an easy feat. Joseph then emphasized that while Vlad had obtained the position through a unique turn of events, he must never lose the handkerchief, as it represented Alicia's very honor. When Vlad asked what the consequences of losing it would be, Joseph warned him that he would have to take full responsibility himself, as such a loss could only happen if he were careless after accepting it so formally. Vlad could see the gravity in Joseph's eyes, which caused him to state with a flustered determination that he would not lose the cloth at any cost. Joseph then produced a paper and noted that the ordeal had ended somewhat absurdly, though he mentioned that thanks to Vlad's efforts he no longer had a need for the document. Vlad asked if it was a promissory note, and Joseph confirmed that it was a certificate stating Alicia had borrowed 10,000 gold. Vlad was visibly shocked by the massive sum, leading Joseph to explain that the money was meant to secure her soldiers in case she lost the duel. Had she lost her status, she would have surrendered herself to save her people from injury. Joseph noted that she hadn't actually borrowed the gold, but it served as a necessary safeguard. Vlad asked if there was a specific reason Joseph had supported Alicia, considering that losing the duel meant losing her right to succession. Joseph compared her cause to a spark in the ashes, stating that one right encounter with the wind is enough to rekindle a flame, and he suggested that if Alicia were harmed, the pressure on the Bazids would be immense. Vlad felt he understood a little more about how nobles lived their lives constantly searching for justification, but his thoughts were interrupted as he noticed something through the window. Joseph asked what was wrong, and Vlad pointed toward the woods to the west, where smoke and dust were rising as a group of men on horses revealed themselves. Vlad was surprised and screamed that bandits were approaching, attempting to pull out his sword until Joseph stopped him, mentioning that he had made preparations for this before the duel even started. As the riders arrived, they immediately knelt before Joseph and his knights. Their leader mentioned they were a bit late because they had been busy collecting a fair price, presenting a small, bloodied bag. Joseph asked if that was the extent of it, and noted that he had requested something different, but he told the man his work was good and asked him to rise. The man looked at Vlad and asked if he was the vessel who had received Lady Alicia's honor, noting that word of his feats had spread everywhere. Joseph remarked that the man could admire Vlad later, while Vlad gazed at the man in front of him, realizing that he was no ordinary person. The aura Vlad sensed from the man was nothing like that of the other knights. It reminded him of the smell of danger that reeked from the abyss of the back alleys. He stared at the man, his instincts screaming that this was someone not to be trifled with. Joseph asked if the group would like to travel with them back to Sterna, but the man declined, stating they had to return more quickly. Joseph expressed his pity, but thanked them for their service, leading the man to state that he was merely being loyal to his duty as Bayezid's hidden sword. The phrase hidden sword echoed in Vlad's mind as he wondered who these people were and what was inside the black sack. Joseph asked if he was curious, and when Vlad admitted he was, Joseph explained that the sack contained the world of the cold, brutal, and unforgiving nobles. Within it lay the head of Andrei Heinel, signaling that his chapter was officially closed. The scene shifted to Sterna, where Joseph's father and Ragmus were conversing about a group of pilgrims passing through. The Baron asked if he should greet them, but Ragmus mentioned they preferred to be left alone to see the dragon's trail quietly. The Baron reflected on the sincerity of pilgrims who desired nothing, noting it had been a long time since he had seen such faith. He suggested looking after them without their knowledge, which caused Ragmus to smile and admit he knew the Baron would say that. The Baron claimed it was his right as a noble to enjoy what he was deserving of, leading Ragmus to begin the preparations. The Count then mentioned that Joseph and Vlad had accomplished a great feat, and Ragmus replied, noting that the report contained words that would make even an old man's heart race. The Baron wondered what it could be, and when the term Swordmaster's First Code was mentioned, he reflected on the elite education of diamonds in the rough, managed with extreme care. He told Ragmus that, in an age where knights are nurtured so preciously, such a sight must have been rare. Ragnos remarked that the Baron would have loved to see it, and the Baron agreed, mentioning the golden generation of Bayzids and all the knights from his time. The Baron joked that at this rate, the veterans would start threatening the newcomers out of jealousy, a prospect Ragmus suggested Joseph would enjoy. The Baron thought of his sons, Rudiger and Joseph, reflecting on how Joseph had been gasping for air and nearly giving up, only to crawl through the mud and bring back a shining light. He concluded that he had a lot to think about, because in the end he could choose only one amongst them. The scene then moved to the cafeteria, where people were eating and gossiping about Vlad's return. They whispered about him defeating a knight and creating his own world, though some dismissed it as ridiculous that a backstreet boy with no roots could use aura. These words created an uncomfortable atmosphere for Sylvanin and his companions, until the door suddenly swung open. Vlad walked in, announcing that he was starving after being away for a month. The entire cafeteria went silent at his presence. It no longer mattered whether the other students came from high or low status families. As they stared at Vlad, they realized that the petty alley fights of children were over. All they could see was the appearance of a single person who now trod in a completely different world. Vlad's meal was ready in front of him, but as he chewed away, he found himself having a difficult time eating. He suspected that things would be this way for a while, because word of the events in Diermar had traveled fast, leaving everyone aware of what had transpired. Across from him sat Portly Canner, who asked what Vlad planned to do during the upcoming vacation. Vlad was confused by the question, so Portly explained that all vessels received a vacation that week. Vlad wondered aloud if he actually qualified for one, since he was not the child of a noble family and had nowhere to go. This caused Portly to offer an official invitation to his own home, mentioning that his father specifically wanted to host Vlad, and noting that he himself had never had a friend over before. Vlad joked that Portly didn't seem to have a great track record with friends, but Portly insisted their house was excellent at hospitality and could provide an unlimited supply of roasted meat. When Vlad still seemed to ponder the idea, Portly mentioned that his family dealt in horses and could help him find one with a better bloodline than Sir Jaeger's own horse. This caused Vlad's interest to peak instantly, leading him to declare that he would ask for a vacation at all costs. The scene then transitioned to a different space, where Vlad and Jaeger were engaged in heavy sparring. Strangely, Vlad's focus was not on the duel, which made Jaeger uncomfortable and annoyed. He screamed at the boy to stay focused. Jaeger swung his sword with increased strength, and though Vlad managed to parry, his focus was wavering. This led Jaeger to strike Vlad across the back, causing the boy to fall to the ground coughing. Jaeger sternly told him that he had warned him not to try things that simply weren't going to happen, asking if Vlad truly thought he had become a big deal after his time in Diermar. Vlad was stunned and silenced by the harsh words as Jaeger questioned if he had become such a joke that Vlad no longer cared for his instructions. Vlad stood up and apologized, but Jaeger told him not to bother coming if he thought he was already a master, or if he believed he could succeed without guidance. He declared they were done for the day and ordered Vlad to leave. As Vlad walked out, Jaeger watched him and thought that while Vlad's achievements were bright and admirable, they were currently as unstable as sand on a beach, liable to be swept away by a large wave at any moment. As Vlad walked through the halls, the voice in his head agreed with Jaeger, noting that everything starts with the basics, and admitting it would have been angry at Vlad too. Vlad explained to the voice that he simply wanted to draw out his aura once more, but the voice reminded him that many knights cannot use aura at all. It explained that aura is a manifestation of potential for those who wish to rise higher, but reminded Vlad that he had only recently taken up the sword. The voice noted that great flowers only bloom on solid foundations, and pointed out that Jaeger wouldn't have been angry if Vlad didn't deserve the investment of his expectations. Vlad exhaled in agreement, thinking to himself that while he was used to scorn and ridicule, the disappointment he felt from Jaeger today was far more uncomfortable. The look in the knight's eyes had hurt more than the strike of the wooden sword. The voice then reminded him that, in his flustered state, he had failed to even bring up the vacation. Vlad realized he had forgotten it entirely, and wondered what the point of a vacation was in the middle of such turmoil, deciding instead to swing his sword until he couldn't think of anything else. That evening, Vlad was seen practicing outside, swinging his sword for hours. In a brief moment of anger, he struck his blade into the earth, causing a wave of force to thrust forward and clear the space in front of him. Sweat dropped from his cheek as the voice told him he had done enough for the day, noting he had reached his quota the day before. The voice warned him that burning too quickly would lead to exhaustion or injury, which would waste all his effort. Vlad stretched his back and looked up at the moon, lost in the thought that he had finally managed to get that shiny thing into his hand. From a distance, Jaeger watched him in silence, comparing the boy to a wolf chasing the moon. The scene then cut away to Trinova in the country of Ravnoma, where buildings were burning and cries echoed through the air. Blood splattered the ground where the bodies of knights lay littered about in a total massacre. A voice pierced the chaos as someone walked toward a nearly lifeless man on the ground, remarking that he had clearly done his best on his last mission. The dying man looked up at the man and identified him as Godin, noting that he had finally arrived. The man on the ground mocked Godin, saying he had heard of him, a man whose lord's orders came first and honor second. He remarked that Count Gaidar's knights didn't used to be so blindly obedient in the past. Godin coldly responded that such a lack of obedience was exactly why they were all dead. The man told Godin that one day his own light would vanish as well, and told him to inform Count Gaidar that he would be waiting for him in hell. In response, Godin merely agreed as he raised his sword and sliced downward, resulting in blood filling the air as the man was silenced forever. The next day, Vlad was called into Joseph's office, where he was shocked to hear the word vacation mentioned. Joseph confirmed the news, explaining that Vlad had been invited to the house of portly Canor. When Vlad asked how he could have known, Joseph noted that rumors travel fast, especially since Sir Gregory's vassal had been rambling about it everywhere in excitement. The word had moved swiftly from Canor to Sir Gregory, then to Jaeger, and finally to Joseph. Joseph mentioned that he had been planning to give Vlad time off regardless, and since the boy had nowhere else to go, there was no reason to deny the request. Vlad offered his thanks, glancing at Jaeger, but the knight paid him no mind. Joseph noticed the awkwardness, thinking to himself that something had clearly happened between them. However, he decided to keep quiet to respect their relationship rather than forcing a resolution. Within Vlad's mind, the situation felt suffocating, leading him to wonder if he should simply offer his greetings and leave. Jaeger finally spoke, sternly reminding Vlad that even on vacation, a knight must never let go of his sword. He warned that if Vlad missed a day of training, he would know, and if he missed a week, the world would know. Jaeger thought to himself that Vlad was not the type to slack off just because he wasn't being watched, but he felt the need to rein the boy in so he would not go astray. He told Vlad they would speak again upon his return, which caused Vlad to look excited. Joseph then interjected, advising Vlad not to get his hopes too high about the horses, as the problem might be too difficult even for the House of Canor to solve. He suggested that Vlad should simply find out if there were any horses that would accept him, and note which regions those horses were from. Joseph then dismissed him for the week, jokingly adding that there was no need to bring back a gift. Vlad, sweating slightly, promised to keep that in mind, though he inwardly suspected that a gift was actually expected. Once the door was closed, Joseph and Jaeger began to speak privately. Joseph brought up the House of Canor and stated that Rudiger was rumored to be there, and Jaeger suggested that if things went well, the two of them might meet each other there. Joseph paused, noting that Rudiger was the type to ask for something if he saw what he wanted, though Joseph stated he had no intention of giving Vlad away. The scene then shifted to Vlad meeting Lady Oksana, where he wondered why he had been summoned again. She was busy measuring him for new clothing for his trip, remarking that the colors looked excellent and suited his sturdy build. Vlad thanked her, and she reminded him that when visiting someone's house, one must look polished as a matter of courtesy, to avoid bringing criticism upon one's parents. She held on to him, causing Vlad to blush as he looked at her beautiful face, and she urged him not to let people criticize her either. Oksana mentioned she would provide a tutor for him after the vacation, noting that the mistake of accepting a lady's honor by hand was a blunder that should only happen once. These words hit Vlad heavily, leading him to apologize. She explained that the position of a knight made him an honorary noble, requiring him to behave accordingly. She then handed him a basket of lemons that Joseph had brought back, mentioning it was impolite to arrive empty-handed. Vlad bowed slightly in gratitude for her thoughtful consideration, and she smiled, wishing him a great break and a safe return. Leaving her office, Vlad caught his reflection in a mirror and felt out of place, thinking that he was wearing clothes that did not suit him. His mind drifted back to his life in Suara and to Zemina, wondering how she was doing. He felt certain she was also wearing clothes that didn't suit her, much like himself. In a different space, several ladies were gossiping about a vessel in the house of Bayezid who was making a name for himself by using aura in Dirmar. They whispered about how handsome he was, suggesting he might even be a noble. Zemina, dressed as a nun and cleaning the floor, paused as she listened. When they mentioned he was blonde with blue eyes and drawing aura at such a young age, she realized it likely wasn't Vlad, thinking there was no way he could be doing that well already. She felt she would just be glad if he were healthy and okay. The ladies noticed her pause and scolded her, calling her a redhead and accusing her of slacking off. They reminded her that she hadn't paid any support to the place and would have to work her whole life to pay it off. They ordered her to finish her chores unless she wanted an earful from the Mother Superior, laughing as they noted she had no other place or person to go to. As they walked off, Zemina tried to stay positive, thinking she had at least learned this type of work at Rosie's. However, her smile turned to a frown as she remembered the godforsaken day she arrived. She recalled the head lady of the monastery telling them that they couldn't allow girls who had walked in filthy places into a home so close to God. Marcella had screamed in protest, asserting that the children were all virgins and that the money she had donated over the years could feed them all for a decade. Despite this, the nun remained firm. Zemina had asked Marcella what would happen to her, but Marcella told her to worry about herself and get inside the monastery. The nun had stopped Marcella from following the girls, and Marcella admitted she hadn't expected to be allowed in anyway, asking only that the nun take care of the children. Suddenly, men from One-Armed Jack's gang arrived, screaming that they had found Marcella. They grabbed her and handled her roughly, while Zemina screamed. As the men dragged Marcella through the snow to take her back to Suara, the doors of the monastery were shut. The memory caused Zemina to tear up, sobbing and calling out Vlad's name, desperately hoping for a way home from this dreadful life. Vlad arrived outside the Kenor mansion and stood amazed at the sight of the humongous estate. He considered how impressive it was that a man who was not a noble could hold such incredible influence in Sterna. Beside him stood portly Canor, while several household workers gathered at the entrance. The butler welcomed Portly back, which caused Portly to scream out in joy and hug his butler, mentioning how much he had missed him. The butler noted that it was wonderful to see him after so long, leading Portly to ask where his father was. The butler explained that the master had gone to greet some guests who had made a sudden visit. If Vlad did not mind, the butler suggested they take a look at the ranch, which he described as the pride of their family. Vlad agreed that he was fine with that. Vlad mentioned that he would first like to see the horses, as he had great expectations. The butler assured him that while the family head would eventually show him the most precious horses, it wouldn't hurt to see the rest of the stable first, so he escorted Vlad into the grounds. Upon arriving at the stables, the horses' reactions were exactly as expected. They abhorred the sight of Vlad and began screaming and neighing as they all ran off. It was so bad that even the cows ran from Vlad, and the sheep weren't any different. The butler noted that the situation seemed quite serious and asked if Vlad had tried going to church about it. Vlad insisted he was not cursed and mentioned he was vouched for by Father Andrea, resulting in an apology from the butler. Vlad felt a sense of dread, glaring at the horses in the distance and wondering what the point of using aura was if he couldn't even ride. He imagined everyone else looking awesome, riding into battle, while he was left behind in a trail of dust. Portly noticed Vlad's distress and encouraged him to look at all the horses on the ranch, those for battle, riding, working, and even slaughtering. He insisted there had to be one right horse for Vlad, which caused Vlad to look distraught. Portly responded that there was a wonderful horse with a great bloodline that his father had recently brought, and he promised to pester him to show it. He suggested they relax and have a great dinner first, and they walked off toward the mansion. Later that evening, a huge feast was prepared in the kitchen, and Vlad expressed surprise at the scale of it, noting that the family didn't do anything moderately. Portly laughed off the embarrassment just as a man called out to welcome them. He introduced himself as Olsen Connor, the family head, and Portly's father. He apologized for not receiving such an important guest in person, leading Vlad to introduce himself as Sir Jaeger's vassal. Olsen laughed and said he already knew of him, as the rumor of the boy who invoked the Swordmaster's first code for the first time in ages had spread across all of Sterna. As they stood together, Olsen thought to himself that the birth of a new star was the pride of Sterna, and felt proud that Portly had made such a great friend. He invited Vlad inside to talk while dinner was being prepared, mentioning how glad he was to have important guests over. Vlad wondered if these guests would be joining them, and Olsen noted that everyone visiting was from the Bayezid family. Vlad was surprised and wondered who it could be, but upon entering the room, he was shocked to see a group of men standing with swords, with Rudiger sitting close to the fire. Rudiger folded his hands and noted it had been a long time, asking if Vlad had been well. Vlad instantly bent over, placing his hand on his chest to greet Mr. Rudiger, admitting he hadn't expected to see him there. Rudiger questioned if it was okay for Vlad to eat with him today, noting that the food was too great to turn down. This caused Vlad to remember his previous refusal of the peanuts, realizing he had likely gotten on Rudiger's wrong side by rejecting his kindness. He noticed the other knights glaring at him in annoyance, and understood he was hated, because he had beaten each of their vassals. Determined not to be intimidated, Vlad calmly said that today was fine, and that he had been looking forward to the meal. Rudiger smiled and mentioned he heard Vlad was on vacation, asking if he had some time tomorrow. Vlad was surprised by the invitation to go somewhere, and the scene shifted to early the next morning. Men were riding on horses with Rudiger in the lead, while Vlad sat in a carriage with a beast lady riding her horse beside Vlad. She asked what he was staring at, questioning if he had never seen a werbeast before. She introduced herself as Dorothea. Vlad admitted it was a first for him, leading her to say it would be weirder if he had seen one before. She asked how a boy from the back alleys of Suwara became a vessel of Bayezid, and Vlad countered by asking what the big deal was compared to a werbeast being Mr. Rudiger's mage. Dorothea was annoyed and questioned how someone who used aura couldn't even ride a horse, noting that even the fatty knew how to ride. Vlad looked away, annoyed, and remarked that life shows you all sorts of things. Dorothea continued to berate him, which caused Vlad to wonder if she ever got tired of grumbling. He felt the vacation was becoming quite a chore. When she asked if he was listening, Vlad asked if all werbeasts were this talkative, to which she accused him of racial discrimination. Vlad then asked if all mages were this talkative, leading her to ask if he was now discriminating her based on occupation. Rudiger turned back and told Dorothea to stop picking on Vlad, noting the boy was hard to borrow. Dorothea complained that Vlad looked constipated every time he looked at her, which caused Rudiger to laugh and say anyone would if they were harassed like that. One of the men then called out that the surroundings were open, and Portly suggested they were going hunting. Vlad remained silent, noticing they hadn't even taken the falcon out of the cage, which led him to believe they weren't hunting at all. Someone pointed toward a group of pilgrims approaching in a line, and Rudiger remarked how lucky they were to see them. He ordered his men to raise the flag and signal their intentions so the pilgrims wouldn't feel unsafe. As the flag was raised, Rudiger suggested they take their time to find their prey. At that moment, a pack of horses led by a black horse was moving together in the distance. The black horse looked out into the horizon just as the ground suddenly began to shake. It sensed something coming at them from underground at a speed that was very uncomfortable. The pilgrims walked along the lower slopes of the mountain, gazing upward at the knights following Rudiger, who maintained a higher path. Vlad watched them with a skeptical eye, thinking that it was obvious they were scouting rather than hunting, as no one had even prepared for falconry. Just then, a violent rumble shook the earth, causing the carriage to strike the ground with such force that it left Vlad feeling dizzy and preferred to walk instead. Portly Canner called out in concern, asking if Vlad felt the urge to vomit, but Vlad insisted it was not that bad as he leaped down from the vehicle. Despite his claim, he noted that his heart was pounding strangely, though he dismissed Portly's suggestion that it was merely from the carriage's shaking. Vlad remarked on the beauty of the view, leading Portly to explain that the trail stretched all the way to Verna. Portly mentioned that while monsters occasionally appeared, they were safer this year thanks to the efforts of Joseph and the hunt Vlad had joined the previous winter. This realization caused Vlad to feel a sense of pride, thinking that he had a personal stake in the peace of the scenery. However, the calm was short-lived as Vlad spotted a cloud of dust rising in the distance, followed by a herd of wild horses, led by an elegant black horse with a flowing mane. As the horses dashed closer, Vlad felt a strange sensation in his chest and struggled to understand why his heart was racing again. The horses appeared to be fleeing from a hidden threat at full speed, an observation that quickly caught the attention of Rudiger. Rudiger's subordinate identified them as a herd of healthy wild horses but became suspicious of their movement, wondering why they were heading south instead of north, where the greener pastures grow at this time of year. Rudiger thought to himself that the behavior was unnatural, as the horses seemed to be running away from something with desperate haste. Vlad found himself petrified as he looked into the eyes of the lead horse, and suddenly, a familiar, bone-chilling cry echoed through the air. While others shouted that an earthquake was occurring, the specific vibration triggered a memory in Vlad, leading him to realize this was something far more precise. Behind the fleeing horses, a massive deathworm burst through the sand, instantly attacking the stragglers. The sight left Vlad's mouth hanging open as he recognized the creature as a remnant of the falling dragon. The deathworm screamed with a bloodthirsty intensity, moving with terrifying speed through the sand and clamping its jaws down on a horse that couldn't escape. Dorothea screamed that something was terribly wrong, noting that deathworms were not usually carnivores. As she stared at the creature's head, she spotted a strange diamond-shaped metal embedded in its forehead, exuding a foul energy. This caused the wild horses to veer sharply toward the pilgrims in their panic, creating a chaotic scene of impending collision. Rudiger barked an order at Dorothea, demanding to know what the creature reacted to, and she explained that since it lacked eyes and ears, it relied entirely on ground vibrations. Rudiger commanded her to get her act together and find a way to lure it away, leading him to order Vlad to take Dorothea to higher ground for protection and to signal the moment a distraction was ready. Portly was still struggling to process the terror, but Rudiger drew his sword, declaring to his men that their mission from the Count required them to be exactly where they were needed, regardless of whether the situation made sense. This prompted the knights to draw their blades and charge toward the carnage on their horses, following Rudiger into the fray. Rudiger privately felt that the situation was unnatural, suspecting an evil force was controlling the creature. He felt a surge of cold anger at the audacity of anyone pulling such a stunt within the Bayezid territory. Meanwhile, atop the mountain, Dorothea poured out a heap of crystals, frantically trying to remember the marking spell for vibrations. Vlad watched her in confusion, until the voice in his head explained that such things were divine secrets, the elements that create the trinity of priests, knights, and mages through aura and divinity. Suddenly, a massive wildfire erupted below, engulfing the deathworm in flames and surprising both Vlad and Portly. Vlad realized that this was Rudiger's doing, watching as the knight used his sword to command a raging fire that caused the creature to stagger. While Vlad thought Rudiger was operating on a completely different dimension of power, the voice in his head disagreed, noting that the attack wasn't good enough because Rudiger hadn't been fully prepared before manifesting the flames. The voice proved correct as the deathworm emerged from the fire seemingly unscathed, its screams echoing through the valley. Rudiger cursed the creature's dragon-like durability, realizing the fight was far from over. The deathworm shrieked at Rudiger with a bloodthirsty intensity, yet its cry failed to shake the knight's resolve. Rudiger skillfully skidded his horse, maneuvering the beast away from the creature's immediate reach. The deathworm instantly retreated underground, tunneling through the earth with terrifying speed. As dust billowed, one of the men called out to ask if Rudiger was unharmed, but the knight sternly warned them not to let their guard down, noting that such a creature was not one to flee so easily. The voice in Vlad's head remarked that the situation was becoming quite complicated, as even the most excellent fighter is rendered helpless against an opponent hiding beneath the soil. This prompted Rudiger to scream at his men to find the beast, insisting it had to be close. Just as they began their search, someone pointed toward the horizon, screaming that the worm was headed straight for the pilgrims. Rudiger roared for his knights to follow and prevent it from reaching them, leading his men in a desperate dash forward. From their vantage point on the cliff, Vlad urged Dorothea to hurry, but his words only caused her to shriek in frustration. She snapped at him, clarifying that she wasn't playing around but was performing a unique were-beast method of casting. She used her tail to meticulously draw a spell on paper, muttering that she was nearly finished despite his pestering. Once complete, she called out to Portly, whom she addressed as Fatty, telling him to get the charm to Rudiger. She explained that to activate the marking spell, one simply had to rub or cut the paper, and she expressed that the process of carving the symbol had rendered her weak to the point that she couldn't walk, let alone ride a horse. She also noted that since Vlad couldn't ride a horse to deliver it, the only person available to deliver the paper was Portly. The voice in Vlad's head noted that even if he could ride, he would be too late. as the deathworm moved far faster through the ground than any horse could travel on land. But Vlad was unwavered. He snatched the paper from Portly and prepared to move. Dorothea instantly screamed at Vlad, called Vlad a lunatic, and asked how he intended to get there in time. Without hesitation, Vlad leaped from the top of the cliff. As he began his descent, he reflected on the tension between Rudiger and Joseph over the family headship, and how the elite knights usually had no need for a vassal's help. However, the sight of the terrified horses and the destructive worm felt too personal. He remembered, down to his very bones, the pain of having a home destroyed by a force one could do nothing about. This shared suffering with the animals fueled his anger and determination. In that moment, his attention was split, causing the voice in his head to scream for him to focus the strength in his toes. But Vlad struck a rock and tripped. His body began to tumble in a chaotic, almost comedic fashion. He struck the cliff face repeatedly, leading the voice to shout for him to round his body. After several painful impacts, he finally dropped to the ground. Portly and Dorothea were stunned to see him moving, wondering how he could have survived such a fall. Vlad stood up, surprised that he hadn't broken every bone in his body. He felt a strange, internal warmth, almost like a healing blessing, and from a distance, the elegant black horse turned its head, its eyes picking up interest as Vlad's body seemed to glow beneath the cliff. The voice explained that this was the blessing of the snake, and without it, the fall would have been fatal. Vlad marveled at the power, but moved swiftly towards Rudiger. As he looked toward the pilgrims, Vlad froze upon recognizing Father Andrea leading the group. This realization made him deeply uncomfortable, as he knew the priests were in immediate danger, and Rudiger was too far away to intervene. The voice in his head mused that coincidence often masquerades as fate, forcing a choice upon the living. Vlad decided he could no longer hesitate. He threw Dorothea's paper into the air and struck it with his sword, choosing to trigger the blessing himself rather than waiting for Rudiger. The magical writing entangled his blade, causing the metal to vibrate violently. He screamed a challenge at the beast and dug his sword deep into the earth. The resulting sonar-like echo surged through the space, but the voice urged him to amplify the vibration even further by summoning his own world. Vlad centered himself, opening his eyes and calling out to the remnant of the fallen gods to look at him. His intense aura flared, acting as an irresistible lure that forced the deathworm to erupt from the ground directly in front of him. The entire battlefield fell silent in shock as they witnessed the young vassal standing alone before the massive creature he had summoned to the surface. The deathworm roared directly in front of Vlad, its massive form fixated on him as it coiled and twisted in the sand, attempting to hunt him down. Vlad scrambled to move as fast as his feet could carry him, heedful of the voice in his head which warned him against a head-on confrontation and urged him to stand back. The monster stood towering over him, but the voice reassured Vlad that while his own internal world was not yet deep enough to resist such a beast, simply keeping it occupied was more than enough. Even as the creature sensed his presence, the sounds of Rudiger's approaching men echoed behind him, leading Vlad to acknowledge that he was well aware of his current limitations. Despite this caution, the deathworm suddenly lunged, dashing straight toward him with a speed that defied its size. But he managed to roll across the dirt just as the beast slammed into the ground where he had stood. The worm disappeared beneath the surface once more, causing Vlad to curse as he looked left and right, frantically wondering if it had turned its hunger toward the pilgrims. As he stood his ground and took a defensive stance, the earth began to rumble violently beneath his feet. The shaking intensified, signaling that the creature was about to strike from below, which caused the voice in his head to scream for him to dodge. It seemed too late, however, as the worm erupted directly under Vlad's feet, appearing to consume him entirely in a cloud of dust. From a distance, Rudiger watched in horror and screamed out in denial at what looked like the boy's certain demise. Suddenly, the black horse from earlier burst through the settling dust, dashing forward with surprising grace. To Rudiger's immense shock, he saw that the horse was actually carrying Vlad, moving swiftly away from the danger. Vlad himself was ecstatic, screaming in realization that he was finally riding a horse. The voice in his head instructed him to look at the animal's forehead through the lens of his world, leading Vlad to notice a spiritual horn and realize the creature was actually a spirit. The voice explained that the horse possessed the mixed blood of a unicorn, which resulted in its majestic and ethereal nature. Riding a horse for the first time filled Vlad with a sense of wonder as he marveled at the new perspective of the world from such a height. He screamed in excitement, finding the experience truly amazing. When Rudiger's men finally caught up and asked if he was okay, Vlad confirmed he was doing fine. Rudiger looked at Vlad's vibrating sword with surprise, realizing the boy had cast the marking spell himself. He was deeply moved by Vlad's selfless bravery, thinking to himself that this young vessel had acted out the Swordmaster's code with his entire being. Rudiger praised Vlad for his honorable and brave decision, noting that he had performed his duty better than any knight present. Vlad was surprised by the high praise, but Rudiger quickly moved to the task at hand, stating they needed to kill the death worm to ensure the pilgrim's safety. He asked if Vlad could guide the spirit horse, noting that with Dorothea's marking and such a majestic mount, Vlad was the only one capable of luring the beast. As the worm began to trail them ferociously, Vlad looked the spirit horse in the eye and realized that it was here to protect its herd, much like he wanted to protect his people. This mutual understanding led him to believe they could work together, resulting in his confident confirmation to Rudiger. Rudiger ordered Vlad to draw the worm around a nearby hill and toward him on the other side. Vlad derailed from the group and dashed toward the slope, leading the deathworm to follow him exclusively. One of Rudiger's men marveled at the incredible boost in speed, while Rudiger smiled, knowing the horse was special. Following the voice's instructions, Vlad lowered his sword toward the ground, using his aura to amplify the marking's vibration and keep the monster's attention fixed on him. Rudiger, meanwhile, ordered the rest of his men to move the pilgrims to safety and prepare for an emergency. As Vlad rounded the hill, the deathworm burst through the hillside in a desperate attempt to catch him. Rudiger saw them coming and took a firm stance, channeling his aura into his blade. He tapped his sword and called out to his world, causing a temporary domain expansion that manifested as glowing lava forming around him. Vlad looked on in awe as the spirit explained that only knights who deeply contemplate themselves can achieve such a feat. Vlad realized that Rudiger was a far more exceptional and ferocious knight than he had imagined, possessing a power that could seemingly burn the world to ashes. The deathworm continued its relentless pursuit, tracking the tail of Vlad's mount, but the creature suddenly sensed a shift in the air and its massive body began to shake. Vlad turned to glare at the beast, noting with a mix of relief and concern that it had abruptly slowed its pace. Within the depths of his mind, the voice observed that the dragon's remnant had finally detected the overwhelming threat of Rudiger's expanding world. Vlad grew uncomfortable, realizing that if his own presence remained too weak, he would lose the monster's attention before the trap could be sprung. In that moment of hesitation, the spirit horse took initiative, surprising Vlad by veering sharply and dashing back toward the deathworm. Vlad screamed at the horse, calling it a brat and demanding to know where it was going as it began to run in tight, frantic circles near the towering predator. Though Vlad was flustered by the proximity to such danger, the horse neighed defiantly, using its own spiritual essence to issue a challenge. The voice in Vlad's head was struck by how the boy's internal world and the snake's blessing were resonating perfectly with the horse, causing a long-forgotten divine secret to rise from the world's ancient memories. This fierce resonance acted as a beacon, forcing the deathworm to resume its chase. In a display of perfect synchronization, the hornless unicorn and the horseless knight moved as one, appearing like a white star streaking across a pitch-black sky. As they moved toward Rudiger's position, the knight continued to intensify his focus. The voice warned Vlad that Rudiger's world was still growing, and he must not lose the beast's focus. But Vlad felt he was reaching his limit, unable to squeeze out another drop of aura. The situation changed when several other knights appeared behind Vlad, screaming for him not to give up. These 5 aura users unleashed their own power, creating a cacophony of energy that ensured the deathworm's attention remained fixed on their position. The voice approved of this assistance as the knights urged Vlad to keep moving past Rudiger. As Vlad and the men swept past the stationary knight, Rudiger opened his eyes and calmly noted that they had done a good job. Standing alone against the beast, Rudiger declared that it was now his turn, asserting that Bayezid's territory was no place for chaos brought by the likes of a dragon's remnant. His sheer anger fueled a massive expansion of his domain, resulting in a wildfire tornado that erupted from the earth. With a single command to be gone, Rudiger slashed at the deathworm. The fire from his domain rocked the creature's massive body, extinguishing its life force and stopping its movement instantly. Vlad watched in total astonishment, wondering if this was the true power of a knight who had contemplated the depths of his own world. To Vlad, the sight felt light years away from common sense. He began to wonder if Godin, Jaeger, or even Pablo possessed such world-shaking power, and he questioned if he could ever reach such heights. The voice in his head offered a firm assurance, noting that if Vlad's world became so unshakable that nothing could cause it to waver, he certainly could. As the dust settled and the flames began to die down, Rudiger's sword had completely vanquished the threat. The knight, exhausted, sat heavily upon the ground. Vlad walked over to check on him, asking if he was all right, to which Rudiger welcomed him back and praised his performance. When Vlad expressed concern that the fire might burn down the grasslands, Rudiger noted the grass was moist enough that the fire would eventually die out on its own. However, when the knight tried to stand, his legs gave out, leading him to fall back to the dirt. Rudiger jokingly asked Vlad for help, but Vlad, equally exhausted, fell limp to the ground beside him, mentioning he would rather just fall as well. This caused Rudiger to fall silent before smiling and remarking that Vlad was a much better rider than the rumors suggested. Vlad countered that the problem had never been with him, but with the horses, and they both watched as the spirit horse returned to its herd. Suddenly, one of Rudiger's men slapped Vlad on the back of the head, praising the little kid for being awesome enough to outshine their own vassals. Vlad felt shy and uncomfortable under the sudden praise, but his attention was soon drawn to Father Andrea, who was approaching with the pilgrims. The priest looked at Vlad with recognition, referencing the light energy he saw during the battle, stating that he recognized Vlad's presence from the light energy he felt from their earlier fight with the undead lady. Father Andrea took Vlad's hand and thanked him with honor as Vlad of Suara. In a move that shocked the young vessel, the priest knelt on the ground and offered a humble prayer, asking the Lord to comfort and bless the boy who had protected them. The pilgrims followed suit, kneeling before Vlad. In that moment, as countless hearts turned toward him, Vlad's influence grew stronger, and his world expanded through the eyes of those he had saved. The scene shifted to the bustling mansion, where the Count held a document while speaking to Ragmus, asking him to confirm with absolute certainty that the intelligence was correct. Ragmus replied in the affirmative, mentioning that Dorothea had relayed the message through the crystal ball. The Count expressed his irritation at the unexpected involvement of magic, leading Ragmus to explain that it appeared some of the old cursed beings were beginning to emerge because the Empire had been lax in its oversight. While the Count felt annoyed by the news, Ragmus pointed out that there were some relieving aspects to the situation as well. The Count agreed, noting that the name of a certain youth had been appearing with increasing frequency. He reflected on the events of the past year, the winter monster hunt, the duel of honor at Heinel, and now his involvement with the pilgrims, thinking that without him, the Bayezid family might have faced disgrace. As he considered the honor the boy displayed, he instructed Ragnos to call Joseph. When Ragmus asked if he intended to grant permission for the boy's wish, the Count remarked that those who demonstrate their worth deserve to enjoy the rights they have earned. The narrative moved to a campsite where the pilgrims and the knights were resting for the night. Vlad sat apart from the group, meticulously sharpening his sword while thinking of the long day they had endured. Rudiger soon approached, carrying a bottle of liquor, and asked why Vlad was sitting all alone looking so pitiful. When Rudiger sat down near the fire and inquired after portly Canor, Vlad explained that Dorothea had taken him away to assist with a task. Rudiger then asked about Father Andrea, to which Vlad noted that the priest was busy praying with the pilgrims. Exhaling, Rudiger remarked that everyone seemed occupied and offered Vlad a sip of his liquor. Vlad declined, mentioning he was in the middle of polishing his blade, which caused Rudiger to note that Vlad always seemed to refuse his offers of help or company. Rudiger observed that every time he had reached out to assist him, he had been met with rejection. This caused Vlad to feel unsettled. Vlad then reached out and grabbed the liquor from Rudiger's hand, identifying it as whiskey, and noting that it was the preferred drink of the nobility. Vlad privately mused that the two brothers certainly shared a taste in spirits despite their differing personalities, and he took a gulp before Rudiger advised him to have his sword inspected once they returned. Vlad expressed surprise at the suggestion, noting he had visited the family blacksmith only a few days prior. He explained that the craftsman believed the handle needed to be removed because the way it was joined to the blade was far too reckless. Rudiger took a sip of the whiskey and commented that the sword was as reckless as its owner. Vlad insisted he did not want to lose the weapon, as it held all the memories he possessed. Though Rudiger found the blade's condition dodgy, he urged Vlad to find the person who had originally forged it. When asked for the smith's location, Vlad paused before stating he was in Suara. Rudiger smiled to himself, thinking how fitting the nickname Vlad of Suara was, as the boy had shone brighter than anyone else that day. Rudiger stood up, encouraging Vlad with the belief that he would be able to fix the blade soon if he hoped for it desperately enough. He tapped Vlad on the shoulder, commended him for how well he had lived up until now, and told him to sleep early, as they were leaving for Sturma the next morning. As Rudiger walked away, Vlad looked toward the horizon, feeling a sense of certainty that he would eventually repair his sword because he had a place to return to. In the distance, the spirit horse watched Vlad from the cliff, sensing the deep energy within him and acknowledging their newfound bond. Elsewhere, Miss Oksana sat beside a maid, knitting carefully while asking if the work resembled the Hainau family crest. After the maid confirmed it was identical to the drawing in the book, Miss Oksana decided to proceed to the next emblem. She picked up the cloth, and as the maid opened the book to the next design, she remarked that she did not need to see the reference, as the image was already vividly engraved in her mind. Miss Oksana mentioned that it was her first time creating the crest, noting that she had only ever seen her mother craft such things in their youth. The maid suggested this made her work even more precious, a sentiment Miss Oksana agreed with, describing it as a tradition largely forgotten by modern society. She added that the knights of the present day, having been raised too softly, were not worthy of lifting the flag that belonged solely to their lineage. The following day, Rudiger led the knights back towards Sterna. One of the knights marveled at the scene, noting that he had never before witnessed such a harmonious sight as a herd of horses running alongside a carriage team. The black horse, having led its companions through the journey, moved in perfect sync with the group. Rudiger agreed that it was a rare encounter, one that would likely never happen again, and he turned to glance at Vlad, sensing that they had shared a brief but deeply special connection. Vlad looked out from his carriage, realizing it was time to part ways with the first horse he had ever ridden, as both he and the creature had their own respective duties to fulfill. When they reached the edge of the cliff, the horse halted and neighed loudly, as if bidding a final farewell to Vlad. Vlad smiled, silently acknowledging that their time together had reached its end. When Father Andrea suggested that Vlad should not feel too sad about the parting, Vlad claimed he was merely saying goodbye for the sake of it. The priest laughed, mentioning that it was difficult for humans to be entirely truthful, as life was defined by the happiness of hellos and the tears of goodbyes. He remarked that it had been a truly amazing encounter and expressed wonder at when they might meet again, noting that the depth of a connection is not determined by the time spent together. Vlad agreed, feeling a certainty that he would meet the horse again in the future. The scene shifted to the Bayezid Manor, where the Count sat in a state of growing annoyance. He had just received urgent news regarding the fall of Count Renorma and asked Ragmus to confirm the details. Ragmus confirmed the news, causing the Count to reflect on how strange the West's activities had been and to express disbelief that Count Gaidar's house could possess such strength. Ragmus explained that the Western houses had formed an alliance with Gaidar at the center, leading to Ravnorma's defeat through sheer force of numbers. When the Count questioned why the royal family had remained idle, Ragmus noted that the central matters remained shrouded in mystery. Rising to his feet, the Count moved toward the wide window and peered out into the heavy rainfall, musing that the North possessed a unique and powerful spirit, built upon a wall of unshakable will that kept it free from central influence. This had led the region to be largely ignorant of the struggles in other territories, but the Count felt it was unthinkable that a guardian of the ancient pacts could fall so easily. He realized that the traditions of the past were becoming meaningless to the new holders of power, and he remarked to Ragmus that these were turbulent times. Ragmus agreed, stating that even if the empire had become lax, a line must be drawn. The Count suspected that the collapse of Ravnorma's family might signal the dawn of a new age, but his attention was caught by the arrival of the pilgrims and knights downstairs. He realized that they were not merely pilgrims, but refugees from Ravnorma, led by Father Andre. Downstairs, Vlad stood before the door, feeling deeply uncomfortable. He was conflicted, thinking that while rescuing the pilgrims had been the right thing to do, his involvement with Rudiger might displease Joseph Bayezid. He knocked on the door, fearing that Jaeger would react with anger or physical discipline for his recklessness. When he finally announced his presence and entered, he found Joseph seated with Jaeger standing nearby. Joseph noted that they had returned a day early, and when Vlad confirmed this, Joseph inquired about his health. Vlad assured him he was fine, though he sensed a tension in the room that suggested Joseph was more upset than he let on. Joseph then began to ask about the back alleys of Suwara, specifically inquiring whether conflicts in that region truly ended when all the members of a particular group died or surrendered. When Vlad confirmed this was true, Joseph asked about his inability to send letters to his lover in the convent. Vlad felt a bead of sweat drop as he corrected him, calling her a friend. Joseph dismissed the distinction, acknowledging that he had been aware of the situation all along, and criticized the lack of communication for being rooted in fear for the safety of those back home. Joseph then mentioned that the man known as One-Eyed Jack had truly been valuable in his own way, leading Vlad to think that the man had likely used his wealth to form connections with powerful figures in Suwara to maintain his reliance. Joseph stood up, announcing that because Vlad had struggled so much for his sake, he would repay him as promised. He walked to a corner of the room and retrieved the flag Miss Oksana had been knitting earlier. Joseph explained that the flag represented a knight's honor, an object he could never possess himself, and he had resolved to create a knight who could carry it in his stead. He looked at Vlad, declaring that the boy was worthy of carrying such a symbol. The Bayezid family would guarantee his status, and as he promised, they would provide their full support. He handed the flag to Vlad, telling him to raise his head with pride, slash through the worthless people binding him, find his freedom, and return when he was done. The words stunned Vlad, who felt as though he were living through a dream. Joseph smiled while Jaeger nodded in approval. Vlad struggled to compose himself as he thought of his roots. The unadorned sword from the girl and the old man, the identity token verified by the priest, the handkerchief from the noble lady, and now the family flag. In that moment, Vlad knelt to the ground, accepting the offer. His eyes filled with tears as he responded to Joseph that he would follow the command. Count Bayezid sat upon his throne, observing the pilgrim who knelt before him. Their leader, Father Andre, addressed the Count directly, identifying the coffin they had carried as proof of the sacred pact. Father Andre explained that the container held a fragment of the prime dragon of perfection, a remnant famously taken down by the founding king. After a moment of contemplation, Count Bayezid declared his intention to provide his knights to assist in moving the proof of the pact as safely as possible. He invited the pilgrims to stay as his guests until the necessary preparations were finalized, leading Father Andre to offer his thanks before the group departed with the coffin. Once they had left, the Count paused, and Ragmus remarked that the pilgrims really had no other choice. Count Bayezid acknowledged this as he descended from his throne, reflecting that from a broader perspective, the only guardian house of the pact equal to their own was the ruler of the north, the Iron Duke Timur Baranov. Though the Count recognized there was nothing more he could do, the weight of the situation remained on his shoulders. He walked toward a wide window and peered out into the heavy rainfall, eventually commenting to Ragmus that it had been a long time since he last saw that particular flag. Ragmus moved closer to the glass and agreed, noting that it had indeed been quite a while. They watched as a flag was hoisted onto a carriage, which was currently being escorted out of the Bayezid manor. Count Bayezid mused that Vlad could have rested before departing, while Ragmus suggested that the man likely could not control his eagerness. Contemplating the sight, the Count thought that he would have felt the same way. Acknowledging the young man as a knight who had become his own master, he wished Vlad well, silently urging him to travel to his hometown and perform his rightful duty. Vlad rode off towards Suara, which appeared as wretched and hungry as ever. As he passed his former bar, he heard a crowd of men shouting and demanding to know when someone would appear, arguing over who held the right to decide the evening's entertainment based on their wealth. Inside, Marcella checked her reflection in a mirror, unmoved by the chaos. An ugly woman behind her urged her to hurry and serve the crowd, reminding her that she needed to generate as much profit as possible to settle her debts. When Marcella remained silent, the woman grabbed her chin, mocking her confidence and suggesting she would remain trapped here, even as her body rotted. Marcella merely smiled and wished the woman a long life, an act that deeply unsettled the old hag, who viewed the girl's composure as a persistent, vile defiance. Upon stepping outside, Marcella was met by a crowd of hungry, cheering men. The old woman began the auction, goading the men to show their gold coins for the privilege of the Black Rose of Suara. One man offered a single coin, which was quickly topped by an offer of 2. As the men debated pooling their resources, Marcella remained detached, viewing this path of destruction as one she had ultimately chosen for herself. The old woman watched her with a twisted admiration, pleased by the gold Marcella could generate, even while intending to squeeze every last drop of profit from her. Suddenly, someone dared to shout a bid of 4 gold coins, surprising the crowd and making the others feel that they could no longer compete. Before the auction could progress further, a voice pierced the room, offering 100 gold coins. The figure stood in the shadows, and the sound of his approach made Marcella's skin crawl as she felt an odd, destructive resonance that reminded her of a dark nest from her past. The man walked into the light, his steps creaking the floorboards, and the old hag breathlessly asked if he truly intended to pay such an amount. As the crowd parted, the man moved directly toward Marcella, his presence radiating an aura that silenced the room. He appeared to be dressed in luxury, and the old woman handed him a menu, assuming that even if the 100 gold was a bluff, he was clearly wealthy enough to afford plenty. The man declined the menu, mentioning that he had missed the taste of grilled sausage, black pudding, hash browns, and white wheat bread. These words perked Marcella's ears, and as he removed the cloth from his face, he ordered George's usual. Marcella gasped in shock, tears welling in her eyes as she realized the source of the gold was not the filth of her usual customers, but the vibrant, glittering light of the boy who had once bathed in that color. Vlad stood before her, revealing his face and announcing that he had returned. The sight of him left Marcella stunned as her tears began to fall. Marcella's heart was heavy as she struggled to comprehend the sight before her, tears filling her eyes while Vlad looked at her with a calm smile. She soon regained her composure and began to whisper, urging Vlad to leave immediately because the subordinates of One-Armed Jack were currently running the establishment. The old woman who managed the bar observed them with growing suspicion, noting the serious atmosphere and deciding that she needed to intervene before anything unexpected occurred. Just then, the men in the room began to notice the tension, rising from their seats and walking toward Vlad with suspicious intent. Marcella began to shake as she realized the men were gathering behind Vlad, but he remained focused, mentioning that he had to settle an exchange before he made any payment. When the old woman asked what he meant by an exchange, Vlad remarked that he needed to retrieve something from One-Armed Jack. The atmosphere in the room turned ominously heavy at these words. One of them pulled his sword and ridiculed Vlad, questioning how he dared to speak the boss's name so lightly, but Vlad responded with terrifying speed. He dashed forward and used a short dagger to slash through the man's throat, causing blood to gush out instantly as the assailant collapsed to the ground. This swift display of lethal force shocked everyone in the space, including Marcella, who stared at the fallen body in disbelief, while the old woman began to scream in terror. Vlad commanded her to be quiet and wait where she was, telling her that merely taking from the men would not be enough, as he intended to take something from her as well. The woman froze, gripped by shock and fear, while the remaining men drew their swords and screamed, demanding to know what kind of wicked stunt Vlad had pulled and who had sent him. Vlad stood firm, holding his dagger with clear intent. He ordered George as usual. This triggered a realization in the crowd, as one man remembered the blonde hair and blue eyes, identifying the boy as Vlad. As Vlad assumed a battle stance, some of the men laughed, questioning how the boy had survived since they believed he had perished long ago, and encouraged each other to take his head to the boss for a reward. Vlad told them to stop their chatter and approach him as they had done on that day, intending to kill him. His ominous tone caused the men to pause, wondering if the boy before them was truly the same child from the past, as he now radiated the intensity of a bloodthirsty wolf. Vlad refused to wait for them, dashing forward to strike the first man, noting that if they would not come to him, he would simply go to them. As the men attempted to swarm him, Vlad moved with fluid, jarring precision, striking one in the stomach and twirling to cut down a third, thinking to himself that he would not let a single one of them escape alive. The violence escalated as Vlad used his dagger to stab multiple men in the neck and belly, a flurry of movement that the onlookers could barely register. His resolve hardened as he thought of the price they must pay for the tears of everyone he held dear, particularly the suffering they had caused Marcella. Meanwhile, in the pub where George used to own, One-Armed Jack sat drenched in liquor, dropping his empty bottle to the table. He exhaled and looked upward, remembering George and thinking that the back alleys of Sawara had become his own domain since his rival's absence. Yet, he felt unsatisfied, driven by a desire to climb higher by standing atop the corpses of his enemies, even though he realized that life in the back alleys ultimately remained in the hands of the higher-ups. He reflected on his past belief that one could only gain something through sacrifice, leading One-Armed Jack to realize that a few words from someone in power could decide his own fate at any moment. His contemplation was interrupted when a man dashed into the room, screaming that they were in serious trouble. When One-Armed Jack asked for an explanation, the man reported that they were surrounded on all sides by soldiers from the Sawara garrison. One-Armed Jack was confused, wondering why the garrison would target them after they had already paid their monthly bribe in advance. As the men around him began to murmur in panic, questioning if the soldiers were merely patrolling or planning an attack, One-Armed Jack suddenly smiled and began to laugh. He felt that the destruction appearing before his eyes was preferable to the anxiety of an unknown end, and in that moment, he realized that Vlad was responsible for the chaos, knowing that after slaughtering the men at the bar, the boy was coming for him next. Outside the pub, a collection of guards, soldiers, and knights gathered as the garrison's arrangement was finalized. Vorden stood among them, inquiring if the other alley was also completely blockaded, to which the mayor responded in the affirmative. Verdun expressed his frustration, noting that the situation had grown significant enough for the Count to discover it. The mayor offered no excuse, prompting Verdun to mention that One-Armed Jack was a man of talent, though he silenced himself after catching the man's inquisitive look. The mayor wondered how a mere knight could be so well informed about the back alleys of Sawara, but he quickly dismissed it, expressing his relief that the cancerous group would finally be eliminated. Internally, Vorden glared at the man, disgusted by the realization that a Black Alley boss could control such a vast system while the man himself condoned it under the title of mayor, clearly benefiting from bribes. Vorden exhaled, and the mayor asked if the knights of House Bayzid were present. When Verdun indicated that Vlad was the one, the man turned to see him walking toward them, and questioned if a single person would be enough, suggesting that he had gathered all the knights deployed in Sawara for this purpose. Vorden insisted that the task could not be left to them, because Joseph had invested his entire heart and soul into setting up this official, public fight for Vlad. Vorden whispered to Vlad, questioning his certainty and suggesting he take soldiers inside, since he would be facing over 50 men. But Vlad assured him that even if he were injured, he would ensure no harm came to Vorden. Recognizing that there was no dissuading him, Vorden handed over the flag that Joseph had asked to be presented publicly. Vlad grabbed the banner, raised it, and struck it into the ground, revealing the 2 crests embedded upon it. The knights behind Vlad murmured in surprise, questioning who the youth was and how he had received such a flag at such a young age. Vlad remained silent, internally affirming that the land of Suara was now his domain, operating under the honorable names of Heinal and Bayezid, and he prepared to exercise his authority over those within. Vorden rolled out a scroll and commanded the back-alley scoundrels and one-armed Jack to listen, declaring that they had disobeyed the laws of the Bayezid family and exploited the people. He proclaimed that Peter Bayezid, the rightful owner of Suara, could no longer tolerate their wickedness, and had sent a proxy authorized by both his house and the Church of Fate to demand they open their doors. As the knights slammed their spears to the ground in a show of force, calling out the name Bayezid, the tension inside the building surged. Vorden encouraged Vlad to proceed without hesitation, and after thanking him, Vlad unsheathed his sword. The voice in his head warned him to prepare and expand his vision, as he would be targeted from all directions, reminding him that the basic tenet of battle was to take the initiative. Vlad centered himself, drawing aura from within his own world, while his mind was momentarily haunted by the possibility that if he had not called Godin in the past, or if one-armed Jack had never threatened George, the current cycle of violence might have been avoided. He ultimately concluded that the only solution was to kill one-armed Jack. Vlad swung his sword, shattering the entrance and flooding the space with bright light, which caused the men inside to stumble and fall amidst the splintering wood. As Vlad walked through the smoke into the pub, he reflected that this world was consuming his own, and he was determined to end the corrupted connection. He announced his presence, identifying himself as Vlad of Suara, the rightful proxy of Bayezid, and a rightful avenger here to conclude their quarrel. He stood amidst the vast number of men and screamed for one-armed Jack, announcing his return. One-armed Jack, sitting under a shaft of light, recognized the voice and rose instantly, laughing to himself at Vlad's arrival, who had come to claim his head. When Vlad made his presence known, one of the men inside screamed for the others to get him, leading them to dash toward Vlad in a sudden rush. Vlad mirrored their movement, dashing forward as the battle commenced. As he swung his sword, the sheer strength of his blade caused at least 5 men to tumble and fall to the ground. The sight shocked the remaining opponents, who wondered if the unwavering gaze in Vlad's eyes was real. He took the opportunity to dash forward again, slicing through 6 more men in less than a second. When an assailant rushed from behind, screaming for Vlad to die, Vlad halted his step and swiftly used his blade to cleanly slice the man's head off. As the head tumbled through the air and struck the ground, the onlookers began to question if this was truly the same Vlad they once knew. One man screamed for the others not to stand back but to surround him, attempting to bolster their failing morale. The men strengthened their resolve and began to circle him, screaming for everyone to pounce on him at once. The men felt distraught, however, as they internally acknowledged that Vlad's extreme skill with the sword meant that stepping forward recklessly would only result in their deaths. As they hesitated, Vlad exhaled and remarked that there was no need for them to think so hard, because he intended to cut them all into pieces anyway. He began to channel his aura, utilizing a technique similar to the one Godin had used earlier. After mapping out the precise trajectories for his strikes upon the bodies surrounding him, he took a deep breath and swung his blade in an aura-infused slash. The strike decapitated the men instantly, resulting in blood splatters rising everywhere as their dismembered body parts were discarded across the room, laying waste to more than 10 men in a single instant. The survivors began to panic, wondering how they could possibly stop someone of his caliber. One man screamed for them to throw fishnets at him, and as the nets descended from above, Vlad dashed forward and the men began to converge on Vlad. They scrambled to block him from the front, while screaming for others to pull him out from behind a pillar. Others shouted to block the stairs, convinced that if they could prevent him from reaching the upper floors, he would be contained. As the men on the higher levels readied themselves to rain down blades upon him, Vlad felt frustrated, thinking that passing through them head-on would be unnecessarily reckless. Some men screamed from behind, taunting him to stop hiding because he started out so confident, so he should come out. Vlad contemplated his next move, noting that he could not rely solely on his aura. He noticed a rope beside him, which reminded him of the complaints he had often heard regarding the heaviness of the curtains, making the area difficult to traverse. This observation provided him with an idea. He used his sword to slice the rope, which caused the lever to elevate, and he grabbed the rope to pull himself upward, flying through the space as he ascended the building. The men below screamed in shock as Vlad utilized the momentum to propel himself toward the upper level. He released the rope and landed in front of the men who had been throwing the nets. One man cursed in disbelief as Vlad glared at them and asked if this was all they had to offer. Vlad dashed forward and dodged the first strike before using his blade to decapitate the man in front of him. His sword was sharp beyond limits, and Vlad's movements were sharper still, leading him to continue slicing through the ranks of his opponents. Observing their errors, Vlad noted that their directions of attack were incredibly stupid, mentally comparing their lack of skill to Yager's wooden sword, which he considered far more dangerous. As they repeated their mistakes, Vlad continued to cut them down with almost comedic ease. He paused to dodge an arrow that pierced a wooden door beside him, revealing that archers were positioned across the space. One archer, annoyed that his shot had failed, screamed for his companions to keep shooting to prevent Vlad from reaching the stairs. As the arrows flew, Vlad ran through the space to avoid them and decided to jump directly toward the archers. He grabbed onto the roofing to swing himself forward and propelled his body toward them. With a vicious gaze, he swung his sword, cleanly slicing the hands and heads off the archers, who fell to the ground. Vlad exhaled, remarking on what a hassle they were, and noting that he would have come to them eventually. He spotted a kettle, drank the water inside, and threw it to the ground, asking if they wanted to come to him or if he should pay them another visit. He glared at them with a smile, asserting that he had to keep going to collect the rent for them, letting his house stay in this state for so many years. This caused the men to tremble with fear as they realized their fatal misjudgment in assuming this remained their territory. Vlad walked toward them with his bloodied sword, fully intending to take control. The nest had been laid, and as far as he was concerned, no one was going to survive his return to reclaim his domain. At the harbor that evening, Haven sat in his office, reflecting on the recent actions of one-armed Jack. He felt a deep sense of unease, noting that Jack had become an unrecognizable figure since the death of George. Haven worried that the once calculated exploitation of debtors had devolved into reckless self-destruction, threatening the entire local economy. As he struggled with the dilemma of reporting the loss of contraband, a man burst into his office with urgent news. The man revealed that the area was under blockade by outsiders from Sterna, who had arrived to apprehend one-armed Jack, leading to a total encirclement by the local garrison. Upon hearing this, Haven acknowledged that Jack had finally crossed a line. When the man asked if Haven was acquainted with the blonde individual reported to be among those from Sterna, he confirmed it was a man who went by the name Vlad. Haven realized the rumors he had heard about the young vassal of Bayezid were true. Haunted by tales of honor duels and the impressive feats attributed to this youth, Haven grabbed his staff and left his office, driven by a need to witness the unfolding events for himself. Back at the inn, Vlad moved through the space with lethal efficiency. The internal voice guiding him observed that his movements were those of a natural-born fighter, displaying a level of talent and will that left others speechless. Vlad dispatched his opponents with clinical precision, pinning a man to the ground and speaking to him with cold indifference before ending his struggle. After surveying the carnage of the room, he concluded that it was finally time to settle his account. He ascended the staircase, and upon entering the room, he announced his presence to One-Armed Jack. One-Armed Jack greeted him with a hollow sense of welcome, extending a glass of liquor while noting the blood-stained state of Vlad's clothes and sword. He remarked that he had dismissed the rumors of Vlad's return, but now realized the truth. Jack chuckled, lamenting that he should have dealt with the boy much sooner. As Jack rose from his chair and drew his sword, he prepared to confront the messy remnants of their past connection. Vlad realized that the consuming need for revenge he once carried had vanished, replaced by a calm certainty that he had finally outgrown the limitations of this world. Their blades collided, and Vlad sensed a shift in the energy between them. Choosing to treat Jack with the brutal respect of a final duel, he launched a relentless series of attacks. The force of their clash echoed through the room, and as Vlad's strikes pressed harder, Jack was driven to his knees. Vlad recognized that the final resolution of their long-standing conflict was rapidly drawing to a close. Vlad's relentless attack began to overwhelm One-Armed Jack, causing the older man to grit his teeth in visible annoyance. Mustering his remaining strength to swing his blade, Jack managed to push Vlad back, instantly rising to his feet to slam his sword toward the youth while screaming about how shocking the transformation was. As they fought, One-Armed Jack marveled at how the rising star who once wielded a mere wooden sword had changed beyond recognition, laughing as he remarked that Vlad had to be at least this skilled to dare return. The struggle caused One-Armed Jack to remember his own youth, a time when he dreamed of grasping the shiny stars of the world at all costs. He recalled needing more strength and more blood to reach those heights, eventually cutting down everyone in his path because no boundary existed between good and evil in the back alleys. This ruthless ambition had allowed him to reach the peak of the slums, yet he now felt he had never truly touched the place he once revered. As he looked upward, he realized the stars he sought were now covered in blood and greed, resulting in a sudden realization when the light radiating from Vlad became too bright to bear. He recognized that Vlad was the one who had actually reached the stars he could only admire from afar, leading him to wonder if the true goal was simply to grab what shines. In that moment of distraction, Jack lost sight of the duel, which allowed Vlad to use his sword to slice away Jack's remaining organic hand, effectively rendering the man armless. This turned the once feared boss into a tragic figure, and as his limb fell to the ground, he screamed in agony. Vlad paused to glare at his opponent, causing Jack to break into a frantic, mocking laugh, screaming that he hoped George could see this. This mention of his old master made Vlad incredibly annoyed, leading him to swing his blade with a command for Jack to shut his mouth. Jack desperately used his prosthetic arm to try and block the onslaught, but Vlad was driven by the thought that this man deserved no forgiveness. He remembered how Jack had played a part in George's death while hindering the progress of Suara, specifically fueled by the rage that this was the man who had sold Marcella off. These thoughts caused Vlad to strike repeatedly at Jack, who could barely fend off the attacks with his mechanical limb. Vlad determined that Jack deserved a miserable death, but Jack continued to poke at Vlad. He told Vlad to open all the rum in the back alleys and have a party, predicting that the boy would climb even higher than he ever did. Vlad told him once more to shut up as their blades clashed in a final collision that forced them both back. As the scene settled, the shadows told the story. Vlad stood firm, having struck Jack squarely in the chest. One-armed Jack smiled at the end, thinking that being crushed by a young, rising world like Vlad's was a far better fate than being destroyed by a cold, massive world as George. Vlad asked if he had any last words, leading Jack to reach out with his prosthetic arm and place it on Vlad's head. He told the boy he had done a great job and should rest before leaving, an act that only annoyed Vlad further as he pulled his sword from the man's chest. Jack struggled to maintain his stance as Vlad stepped back, his body leaking a fatal amount of blood. He reflected that while he had lived an evil life, it had been a fierce one, even if he was now being cursed and overpowered by Vlad's shining world. With a final scream to his men that he had a great time, he called out George's name and fell backwards. His body tumbled over the edge of the upper floor, falling towards the lifeless bodies scattered below. As Vlad watched the lifeless form descend, he thought to himself that while revenge was supposed to be sweet, there was a lingering bitterness in his mouth. He turned back toward the table, spotting the cup of dry gin Jack had poured, and drank its contents. He exhaled, thinking of Jack's prediction that he would climb higher, and remained silent for a long moment. Placing his hand on the table, he whispered a final word to his dead boss, telling him to take his legacy back. As a knight should only receive what he is paid for, Vlad walked out of the room, leaving a single gold coin on the table beside the glass. He left the scene of the massacre behind, noting how the place where people passed like stagnant water had been disrupted by the ripple of Jack's passing. Finally, having taken his revenge, Vlad decided it was time to find his own way forward. The next part will be out soon. I really hope you enjoy the videos here, and always remember, Lulon can be your manhwa destination, so let's cement it by subscribing. Bye for now, but check out my other videos and remember to drop a like.